Bem-vindo sinopse em português, PTBR. Ela contratou um homem sem teto, mas congelou quando viu que seu reflexo estava ausente. Elena Voss, uma jovem empresária solitária que administra uma biblioteca antiquária em uma cidade esquecida nas montanhas da Transilvânia, decide contratar um homem misterioso encontrado nas ruas durante uma tempestade de inverno. Ele se apresenta como Adrian, um andarilho de aparência nobre, mas trajado em trapos, com olhos profundos que parecem carregar séculos de tristeza. Helena oferece-lhe abrigo e trabalho, como assistente na biblioteca, movida por compaixão, mas logo percebe detalhes perturbadores. Adrian nunca come, nunca dorme, e sua imagem não aparece nos espelhos antigos da loja. Aterrorizada, Helena descobre que Adrian é, na verdade, um servo imortal amaldiçoado pelo próprio Conde Drácula, há mais de 200 anos, condenado a vagar eternamente sem descanso, ajudando mortais em segredo como penitência por um crime que cometeu em vida. Ele foi um padre que traiu sua fé por amor, e sua punição foi tornar-se uma sombra sem reflexo, sem alma visível, invisível até mesmo para Deus. Conforme Helena e Adrian trabalham lado a lado entre manuscritos góticos e livros proibidos, uma conexão inesperada surge entre eles. Ela, a mortal que vê bondade onde o mundo vê monstro; ele, o amaldiçoado que encontra na compaixão dela a primeira centelha de redenção em séculos. Mas a maldição de Adrian não pode ser quebrada facilmente. O Conde Drácula ainda observa, e ele não permite que seus servos escapem sem um preço terrível. Helena terá que escolher entre sua própria vida e a salvação de um homem que não deveria existir, enfrentando caçadores de vampiros, rituais de sangue e o próprio Drácula, que retorna para reclamar o que é seu. Entre amor proibido, sacrifício e redenção, a história explora se a compaixão humana pode verdadeiramente libertar uma alma condenada pela eternidade. Agora vou criar o capítulo 1. Aguardo seu OK para prosseguir para o próximo capítulo. The winter wind tore through the narrow streets of Valsburg like a living thing, howling between the stone buildings and shaking the iron lanterns that hung from rusted chains. Snow fell in thick, suffocating sheets, turning the cobblestones into treacherous mirrors of ice. The town huddled against the storm, shutters drawn tight, hearths burning low, as if the people inside knew that some nights were not meant for the living. Elena Voss locked the heavy oak door of her antiquarian bookshop and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the blizzard swallow the world outside. The shop was silent now, the only sound the faint creak of old wooden shelves and the distant moan of wind through cracks in the stone. She had inherited the shop from her grandfather 5 years ago, along with the crumbling townhouse above it, and a collection of books so old that some of them predated the printing press. Most were written in languages she could not read, bound in leather that felt wrong to the touch, filled with illustrations that seemed to move in the corner of her eye. She had learned not to look at those books too closely. Eleanor wrapped her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned back toward the counter, her breath misting in the cold air. The shop was always cold. No amount of firewood seemed to warm it. She suspected the chill came from the books themselves, from centuries of forgotten knowledge and forbidden thoughts, pressed into parchment and hidden away from the light. Her grandfather had warned her in his final days that some books were not meant to be read. He had pointed to the locked cabinet in the back room, the one with the iron cross nailed to its door, and told her never to open it. She had obeyed, mostly. Elena was counting the day's meager earnings when she heard the sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping against the shop window. She looked up, her heart suddenly loud in her chest. Through the frosted glass she could see a shape, a man tall and bent against the storm, his hand raised to knock again. For a moment she did not move. No one came to the shop this late. No one came to the shop at all most days. The people of Valsburg avoided it, crossing the street when they passed, making the sign of the cross when they thought she was not looking. They remembered her grandfather, and they remembered the stories. The knocking came again, more insistent now. Elena set down the coins and moved slowly toward the door. She could see him more clearly now, pressed against the glass like a ghost. He was dressed in rags, his coat torn and stained, his hair long and tangled with snow. His face was pale, almost colorless, and his eyes were dark hollows that seemed to drink in the light from the shop window. He was homeless, that much was clear, but there was something else about him, something that made her hesitate with her hand on the lock. He stood too still, too straight, despite the storm raging around him. His eyes did not beg or plead. They simply watched her, patient and unblinking, as if he had all the time in the world. Elena unlocked the door and pulled it open just enough to speak. The wind screamed in, filling the shop with snow and cold. The man did not move. "We are closed," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. The man tilted his head slightly, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, and his voice was low and careful, each word shaped with precision. "I know. Forgive the intrusion. I have nowhere else to go." Elena's fingers tightened on the door. She should close it. She should turn him away. But something in his voice held her, something weary and ancient and unspeakably sad. "There is a church 2 streets over," she said. "They take in travelers. The church will not have me." The certainty in his words made her pause. She looked at him more closely, trying to see past the rags and the grime. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his hands long and elegant despite the dirt beneath his nails. He did not look like the beggars who sometimes wandered through Valsburg. He looked like someone who had once been something else, something greater, and had fallen very far. "Why not?" she asked. The man's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, though there was no humor in it. "Because I am not welcome in holy places." Elena should have closed the door then. Every instinct told her to. But instead she found herself stepping back, pulling the door wider, letting the storm and the stranger both into her shop. "Come in," she said quietly, "before you freeze." The man stepped across the threshold, and Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind. He moved with a grace that seemed wrong for someone in his condition, as if the cold and the hunger did not touch him at all. He stopped just inside the door and looked around the shop, his dark eyes moving slowly over the shelves and the shadows. "You have many books," he said. "Yes. Old books. Very old." He nodded, as if this pleased him. Elena closed the door and bolted it, her hands shaking slightly. Now that he was inside, she could see him more clearly. He was taller than she had realized and thinner, his clothes hanging from his frame like burial shrouds. But it was his face that held her attention. It was a beautiful face in a ruined sort of way, with high cheekbones and a straight nose and lips that might have been carved from marble. His eyes were the color of old iron, and they did not blink. "What is your name?" she asked. "Adrian. I am Elena." "I know." She frowned. "How?" "Your grandfather spoke of you before he died." Eleanor's breath caught. "You knew my grandfather?" Adrian's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a shadow passing over water. "I knew him many years ago. He was a good man. He understood things that others did not." Elena did not know what to say to that. Her grandfather had been many things, but good was not the word most people would have chosen. He had been obsessed, consumed by his books and his research, spending his last years locked in the back room with the cabinet and the cross. He had died alone, surrounded by manuscripts written in blood and ash. "Why are you here?" she asked. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and she had the strange sensation that he was weighing something, deciding how much truth to offer. "I am looking for work," he said finally. "I have skills that might be useful to you. I can read ancient languages. I can repair damaged texts. I can catalogue and organize. I ask for very little. Only shelter and a place to work." Elena should have said no. She should have given him a few coins and sent him on his way. But the shop was too much for one person, and she had been drowning in her grandfather's collection for years, unable to make sense of the chaos he had left behind. And there was something about Adrian, something that made her think he was telling the truth about his skills. "I cannot pay much," she said. "I do not need much. You would have to sleep in the back room. It is cold and there is no bed." "That will be sufficient." Elena hesitated, searching his face for any sign of deception or danger, but his expression remained calm and neutral, as if he had no expectations at all. "You can start tomorrow," she said. "I will find you some blankets." Adrian inclined his head, a gesture that seemed oddly formal. "Thank you, Miss Voss. You are very kind." He said it with such gravity that Elena felt embarrassed, as if she had done something extraordinary, instead of simply offering shelter to a man in a storm. She turned away and began gathering blankets from the cupboard near the stairs, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled. When she returned, Adrian was standing in front of the shelves, his fingers hovering just above the spines of the books without quite touching them. He seemed absorbed, lost in some private contemplation. "These are remarkable," he murmured. "Some of these texts have not been seen in centuries. My grandfather collected them. He had excellent taste and dangerous curiosity." Elena handed him the blankets, and for a moment their fingers brushed. His skin was cold, colder than the winter air, and she pulled back instinctively. "You are freezing," she said. "Come, I will show you where you can warm yourself." She led him through the shop, past the towering shelves and the narrow aisles, toward the back room where her grandfather had spent his final years. The door was heavy and marked with symbols she did not understand, iron nails driven into the wood in patterns that hurt to look at. She pushed it open and gestured inside. The room was small and windowless, lit only by the oil lamp she carried. There was a desk covered in papers, a chair, and against the far wall the locked cabinet with the cross. Adrian's eyes went to it immediately, and Elena saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, fear, hunger. "You must not open that," she said quickly. Adrian tore his gaze away and looked at her. "I have no intention of opening it, Miss Voss. I know what it contains." "What?" But he did not answer. Instead, he moved to the corner of the room and set the blankets down, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were performing some ritual. "I will not disturb you," he said. "Thank you again for your kindness." Elena wanted to ask more questions, wanted to demand answers, but exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight. She nodded and left the room, closing the door behind her. She climbed the narrow stairs to her living quarters above the shop, her mind racing. She had just invited a stranger into her home, a man who claimed to have known her grandfather, who moved like a shadow and spoke in riddles. She should have been afraid, but instead she felt something else, something she could not name. She undressed and climbed into bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the town, but inside the shop was silent, too silent. Elena lay awake for hours, listening for any sound from the room below, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no movement, nothing at all. It was only when the first light of dawn began to seep through her window that she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Her dreams filled with shadows that had no faces, and books that whispered in languages she had never heard. When she woke, she went downstairs and found Adrian already at work, sorting through a pile of manuscripts at the front desk. He had cleaned himself somehow, though she could not imagine how or where. His hair was tied back, his clothes, while still threadbare, were neat. He looked almost respectable. "Good morning, Miss Voss," he said without looking up. "Good morning." Elena moved to the counter and began preparing tea, her movements automatic. She glanced at Adrian as she worked, trying to reconcile the man before her with the ragged stranger from the storm. In the morning light he looked different somehow, both more and less real. It was not until she set a cup of tea in front of him and saw him smile politely but not reach for it that she realized something was wrong. She watched him for a moment, waiting for him to drink, but he simply continued working, his hands moving deftly through the papers. "Are you not thirsty?" she asked. "I do not drink tea." "Coffee, then? Water?" "I do not require refreshment, Miss Voss, but your thoughtfulness is appreciated." Elena frowned. Everyone required refreshment. It was not possible to survive without water, but before she could press the matter, Adrian stood and crossed to the far wall where an antique mirror hung in a gilded frame. He reached out as if to adjust something on the shelf below it, and Elena happened to glance at the mirror's surface. She saw herself, reflected clearly. She saw the shop behind her, the shelves, the morning light falling through the windows, but where Adrian stood, there was nothing. No reflection, no shadow, only empty air. Elena's cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Adrian turned slowly, and she saw in his eyes that he knew exactly what she had seen. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply stood there waiting, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. Elena's voice came out as a whisper, broken and afraid. "What are you?" Adrian's expression did not change, but something ancient and terribly sad passed across his face. "I am exactly what you fear I am, Miss Voss. I am a servant of the Count. I am one of the damned. And I have been searching for redemption for longer than your town has existed." Elena stood frozen in the center of her shop, fragments of the shattered teacups scattered at her feet like pieces of her breaking understanding of the world. Adrian remained perfectly still by the mirror, his hands at his sides, his face expressionless. The morning light fell across him in pale strips, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air but somehow never quite touching his skin. He cast no shadow on the floor, no reflection in the glass. He was there and not there, real and impossible at the same time. Her voice came out strangled, barely more than a breath. "You are a vampire." Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Not in the way you understand the word. I do not hunt. I do not kill. I have not taken blood in 200 years. But you are dead. Yes." The simple admission hit her like a physical blow. Elena's legs threatened to give out beneath her, and she reached back blindly for the counter, gripping its edge until her knuckles went white. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, what he was telling her. Every story her grandfather had ever whispered, every warning the villagers had muttered, every shadow she had dismissed as superstition suddenly became horrifyingly real. "The Count," she whispered. "You said you are a servant of the Count. Do you mean Dracula?" Adrian's eyes closed briefly, as if the name itself caused him pain. "Yes, Count Dracula, my master, my tormentor, my eternal jailer." Elena's breathing came in short, rapid gasps. She should run, she should scream. She should flee the shop and never return, but something held her there, something stronger than fear. Perhaps it was the absolute exhaustion in Adrian's voice, or the way he stood so perfectly still, as if afraid that any sudden movement would send her running. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a man carved from grief. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why did you come to my shop?" Adrian opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her feel as though he were seeing straight through her skin to the bones beneath. "Because your grandfather once tried to help me. Because this place is filled with books of forbidden knowledge, texts that might contain the answers I seek. And because I sensed in you the same compassion that your grandfather possessed before the weight of knowing broke him. My grandfather knew what you were. Yes, I came to him 20 years ago, seeking aid. He spent months researching my condition, trying to find a way to break the curse that binds me. He came close. So close. But in the end, the knowledge destroyed him. He learned things that no mortal mind should contain, and it consumed him from within. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. Her grandfather's final years had been madness, his journals filled with diagrams and incantations that made no sense, his hands stained with ink and stranger substances. He had died raving about crosses and mirrors and blood, and she had thought it was simply the deterioration of age. But if what Adrian said was true, if her grandfather had been trying to save a vampire's soul, then his madness had a purpose, a terrible, impossible purpose. "What are you?" she asked again, desperate for understanding. "If you are not a true vampire, then what curse has made you this way?" Adrian moved slowly away from the mirror, each step measured and careful, as if approaching a frightened animal. He stopped several feet from her, maintaining a respectful distance, and when he spoke his voice was low and filled with centuries of regret. "I was a priest once, Father Adrian Renfield, ordained in the service of God, devoted to protecting my flock from the darkness that prowled the mountains. That was in the year 1794. I was young and arrogant and certain of my righteousness." He paused, and Elena saw his hands clench and unclench at his sides, the only sign of emotion in his carefully controlled demeanor. "There was a woman in my village. Her name was Magdalena. She was beautiful and kind and everything that was good in that dark time. I loved her, though I knew such love was forbidden to one who had taken holy vows. I fought against it. I prayed. I fasted. I drove iron nails into my own flesh to punish the desires of the body. But love does not die for lack of nourishment. It only grows more desperate, more consuming. Elena listened in silence, her fear slowly giving way to something else. Pity, perhaps. Or recognition of a pain that transcended death itself. One night, Adrian continued, his voice growing softer, more distant, Magdalena came to the church seeking sanctuary. She had been marked by the Count, chosen as his next bride. She begged me to protect her, to hide her within the sacred walls where the undead could not enter. And I did. I hid her in the crypts beneath the altar, surrounded by holy water and crucifixes and prayers written in the old language. His voice cracked, the first real emotion breaking through his careful mask. But the Count is patient, and he is cunning. He did not need to enter the church himself. He sent his servants, mortals who had been enthralled by his will, who could walk on holy ground where he could not. They came in the deepest part of the night, while I was upstairs preparing the evening mass. They dragged Magdalena from her hiding place and took her out into the darkness, and I heard her screaming my name as they carried her away. Elena's hand went to her mouth, horror and sympathy warring within her. I broke my vows that night. I abandoned my post, my faith, my God. I ran after them into the forest, armed with nothing but a wooden cross and desperate love. I found them at the ruins of the old castle, the place where the Count had made his lair for centuries. Magdalena was still alive, barely, her throat torn open, her blood staining the stones. The Count stood over her, watching me with those ancient, pitiless eyes. Adrian's voice had become hollow now, as if he were speaking from somewhere very far away. He offered me a choice. He said I could join him, become one of his servants, and in exchange he would spare Magdalena's life. She would die as a mortal, peacefully, without suffering. Or I could refuse, and he would turn her into a creature like himself, damned for eternity, and I would be forced to destroy the woman I loved with my own hands. "What did you do?" Elena whispered. "I chose damnation. I knelt before the Count and begged him to take me instead. And he laughed. He laughed because he had already made his decision, and my choice was meaningless. He drank from my throat until I could no longer stand, until the world became darkness and ice, and when I woke 3 nights later, I was no longer human. But I was not fully vampire either. The Count had created something else, something in between, a creature bound to serve him, but denied the power and hunger of the true undead. A ghost in a living shell, a reflection that casts no shadow." Adrian looked down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. He called me his greatest punishment, a priest who had betrayed his God, condemned to eternal existence without the release of death, without the comfort of faith, without even the dark satisfaction of the hunt. I cannot die. I cannot feed. I cannot pray without my lips burning. I cannot enter a church without agony consuming my body. I am trapped in this form, serving the Count's will whenever he calls upon me, unable to resist, unable to rebel. "And Magdalena?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "He turned her anyway. Then he commanded me to destroy her, and I did, because I had no choice. I drove a stake through her heart with my own hands while she begged me to save her. That was my first night as the Count's servant. That was 231 years ago. The shop was silent except for the faint creak of old wood settling and the distant sound of wind against the windows. Elena stared at Adrian, trying to comprehend the weight of the story he had told, the centuries of torment compressed into a few terrible moments. She should have been terrified. She should have been reaching for the cross her grandfather had kept behind the counter, the one made of silver and blessed by 3 bishops. But instead she found herself taking a step toward him, then another, until she stood directly in front of him. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. Adrian met her eyes, and she saw in them a depth of sorrow that no mortal could fully comprehend. "Because you deserve the truth. Because I will not deceive you as I have deceived so many others over the centuries. And because I need your help, Miss Voss. Your grandfather was close to finding the answer, the ritual that might break the Count's hold over me. But he died before he could complete his research. The knowledge is here, somewhere in these books, in the texts he locked away. I need you to help me find it." "And if we find it?" Elena asked. "If we break the curse, what happens to you?" "I do not know. Perhaps I will finally die, as I should have died 2 centuries ago. Perhaps my soul will be free to face whatever judgment awaits me. Or perhaps nothing will happen at all, and this is simply another false hope in an eternity of false hopes." Elena searched his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of the monster he claimed to be. But all she saw was a man who had suffered beyond measure, who had carried guilt and grief for lifetimes, who asked for nothing more than a chance at redemption. She thought of her grandfather, driven mad by his search for answers. She thought of the locked cabinet in the back room, the books that whispered in the dark, the knowledge that had cost one man his sanity. She knew that helping Adrian would be dangerous, that it would lead her down paths no mortal should walk. But she also knew that she could not turn him away, not after hearing his story, not after seeing the desperate hope in his eyes. "I will help you," she said finally, "but you must promise me something. Anything. You must never lie to me again. No matter how terrible the truth might be, I need to know that you will be honest with me. If you feel the Count calling you, if you sense danger approaching, if you discover something that might put me at risk, you must tell me immediately. Can you promise me that?" Adrian was silent for a long moment, and Elena wondered if he would refuse. Then he slowly lifted his right hand and placed it over his heart, a gesture that seemed to come from some distant memory of his living days. "I promise, Miss Voss. I will tell you only truth from this moment forward, no matter the cost." Elena nodded, trying to convince herself that she was not making a terrible mistake. "Then we begin today. Show me what my grandfather was working on. Show me the texts he marked as important. We will start from the beginning, and we will not stop until we find the answer." A flicker of something passed across Adrian's face. Not quite hope, but perhaps the memory of what hope had once felt like. He turned and began walking toward the back room, and Elena followed, her heart pounding in her chest. They spent the rest of the morning going through her grandfather's research, spreading papers and journals across every available surface. Elena discovered that her grandfather had indeed been attempting to break a curse, though his notes were cryptic and often contradictory. He had identified 3 potential rituals, each one more dangerous than the last, each one requiring components that seemed impossible to obtain. Holy water blessed by a pope, soil from the grave of a saint, blood freely given by one who had never told a lie. "These are impossible," Elena said, staring at the list. "How could anyone find these things?" Adrian ran his finger down the page, his expression thoughtful. "Your grandfather managed to obtain 2 of the 3. The holy water and the saint's soil. They are in the cabinet." Eleanor's eyes went to the locked iron door with its cross. "In there? Yes. But the 3rd component, the blood of the innocent, he could never find. He searched for years, testing villager after villager. But everyone has told lies, Miss Voss. Everyone carries some small stain of deception. It is part of being human." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What if we cannot find someone like that? What if such a person does not exist? Then I will remain as I am. And eventually, when the Count grows tired of me, he will command me to walk into the sunlight and burn away to nothing. That is the fate of all his servants in the end. The matter-of-fact way he said it made Elena's chest tighten. She looked down at the papers again, determined not to let despair take hold. There had to be another way. There had to be something her grandfather had missed. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, pausing only when customers entered the shop, which happened rarely enough that each interruption felt like a jarring return to the normal world. Hadrian stayed in the back room during these times, emerging only after Elena had locked the door and turned the sign to closed. He never ate. He never drank. He simply worked, his hands moving ceaselessly through the pages, his eyes absorbing information at a rate that seemed inhuman because it was. As the sun set and the shop filled with shadows, Elena finally pushed back from the desk and rubbed her eyes. They had made progress, cataloguing her grandfather's research, organizing his notes into something resembling coherence, but they were no closer to finding a solution. "We should stop for tonight," she said. "I need to eat and you need to rest." "I do not rest, Miss Voss." I do not sleep. The dead do not dream. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with sadness. Elena looked at Adrian, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion that went deeper than any physical tiredness. It was the exhaustion of the soul, worn thin by centuries of existence without purpose. You can still rest, she said gently. Even if you do not sleep, you can stop working. You can allow yourself a moment of peace. Adrian's expression softened, and for the first time she saw something almost like gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, Miss Voss. Your kindness is more than I deserve. Call me Elena. If we are to work together, there is no need for formality. Elena, then. He said her name carefully as if testing its weight, and you may call me Adrian without the title. I have not been Father Renfield for a very long time. Elena smiled slightly, though the expression felt strange on her face after the heaviness of the day. She gathered her things and started toward the stairs, then paused at the doorway. Adrian, she said, not turning around. Yes? I am glad you came here. I am glad you trusted me with the truth. Whatever happens, whatever we find or do not find, I want you to know that. She did not wait for his response. She climbed the stairs to her room, her legs heavy, her mind spinning with everything she had learned. A vampire who could not feed, a priest who had lost his faith, a curse that spanned centuries, and somehow impossibly she had agreed to help break it. Elena ate a simple dinner of bread and cheese, barely tasting it, then prepared for bed. But sleep did not come easily. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the old building, and thought about the man in the room below, the dead man, the damned man, the man who had asked for her help with such desperate hope in his eyes. And somewhere in the distance, in a castle that should not exist in any rational world, she knew that Count Dracula was watching, waiting, patient as only the immortal can be patient. He had allowed Adrian to come here. She was certain of that now. The Count did nothing without purpose, and she had just become part of whatever dark game he was playing. Elena pulled the blankets up to her chin and closed her eyes, though she knew that sleep, when it finally came, would be filled with nightmares. In the room below, Adrian sat in perfect stillness, his eyes fixed on the locked cabinet with its iron cross, and remembered the taste of blood and the sound of Magdalena's final scream, and the weight of the stake in his hands as he drove it through the heart of the woman he had loved more than God, or salvation, or his own immortal soul. The Count's laughter echoed in his memory, patient and cruel and eternal, and Adrian knew with the terrible certainty of the damned that redemption would not come easily if it came at all. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that Elena would never have thought possible. Each morning she descended the stairs to find Adrian already at work, surrounded by manuscripts and journals, his pale fingers moving across ancient pages with the reverence of a scholar and the hunger of a man seeking salvation. They worked side by side, deciphering her grandfather's cryptic notes, cross-referencing obscure texts, searching for any clue that might lead them to a way of breaking the curse that bound Adrian to the Count's will. Elena learned to stop offering him food or drink. She learned to ignore the way he never breathed unless he was speaking, the way his skin remained cold no matter how close he sat to the fire, the way shadows seemed to gather around him even in the brightest lamplight. She learned to see past the supernatural wrongness of his existence and recognize the man beneath, the priest who had sacrificed everything for love and had been punished with an eternity of regret. They talked as they worked, cautiously at first, then with growing ease. Adrian told her about the world as it had been centuries ago, about villages that no longer existed and customs long forgotten. He spoke of the Count with a mixture of fear and something that might have been pity, describing a creature so ancient that human emotion had been worn away like stone beneath water, leaving only hunger and cruelty and an endless, empty existence. "He was a man once," Adrian said one evening as they sorted through a collection of letters written in medieval Latin. Vlad Dracula, Prince of Wallachia, defender of Christendom against the Ottoman Empire. He was brutal even then, infamous for his methods, but he was still human, still capable of love after a fashion. He had a wife, Elisabetta, who threw herself from the castle walls when false news of his death reached her. They said he renounced God the day he found her body broken on the stones below. Elena paused in her transcription, a chill running down her spine. Is that when he became what he is now? No one knows the exact moment of transformation. Some say he made a pact with dark forces in exchange for the power to avenge his wife. Others claim he was cursed by the very church he had defended, punished for his excessive cruelty. What matters is that he has been undead for more than 500 years, and in that time he has created an empire of shadows. Servants like me, scattered across Europe, bound to his will, unable to disobey even if we wished to. How many servants does he have? Adrian's expression darkened. I do not know. Dozens, certainly. Perhaps hundreds. Some are like me, cursed but not fully transformed. Others are true vampires, powerful and hungry, ruling over their own territories in the Count's name. We do not communicate with each other. The Count prefers to keep his servants isolated, easier to control that way. I have not seen another of my kind in decades. Elena set down her pen and looked at him directly. When was the last time he called you? When was the last time you were forced to obey his commands? Adrian was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the walls of the shop. 17 years ago. He summoned me to his castle in the Carpathians and commanded me to retrieve a particular book from a monastery in Prague. A book of blood rituals, bound in human skin, written by a mad monk who claimed to have found the secret of immortality. I stole it from the monastery's vault and delivered it to the Count as ordered. That was the last time I heard his voice in my mind. 17 years, Elena repeated. That seems like a long time for him to leave you alone. The Count measures time differently than mortals do. 17 years is barely a moment to one who has lived for centuries, but you are right to be suspicious. His silence troubles me. I do not know if he is simply occupied with other matters, or if he is watching me, waiting to see what I will do. Either way, I expect to hear from him again soon, and when I do, I will have no choice but to obey. The thought sent fear through Elena's chest, but she pushed it aside. They had come too far to lose hope now. In the weeks of research, they had made progress. Not much, but enough to keep them searching. Her grandfather's notes had led them to several promising texts, ancient grimoires that spoke of curses and their undoing, of bonds between master and servant that could be severed under the right circumstances. The most promising lead was a ritual described in a book called the Codex Sanguinis, written in a mixture of Latin and an older language that neither of them could fully translate. According to the fragments they could decipher, the ritual required 3 elements, just as her grandfather had discovered. The holy water and the saint's soil they already possessed, locked in the cabinet. But the 3rd element, the blood of the innocent, remained impossibly out of reach. Perhaps we are interpreting it wrong, Elena suggested, not for the first time. Perhaps the blood does not need to come from someone who has never lied. Perhaps innocent means something else. Your grandfather tested every interpretation he could conceive, Adrian replied. Innocent as in pure of heart. Innocent as in free from sin. Innocent as in untouched by violence. None of them worked. The ritual is very specific. It requires blood freely given by one who has never spoken a falsehood. Elena sighed and rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache forming behind her eyes. The more they researched, the more impossible their task seemed, and yet she could not bring herself to give up. Not when she saw the fragile hope in Adrian's eyes every time they made even the smallest discovery. It was during the 4th week that everything changed. Elena was shelving books near the front window when she noticed the man standing across the street. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the shop, and there was something in his posture that made Elena's skin prickle with unease. She turned away from the window and continued her work, but when she glanced back a few minutes later, the man was still there, unmoving, watching. "Adrian," she called softly. "Come here." Adrian emerged from the back room, his expression immediately alert. He joined her at the window and followed her gaze. The moment he saw the man, his entire body went rigid. "We need to close the shop," he said quietly. "Now." "Why? Who is he?" "A hunter. One of the Order of St. Michael. They are a secret society within the Catholic Church," dedicated to destroying supernatural creatures. They have been hunting the Count and his servants for centuries. Elena's heart began to race. How do you know he is one of them? The cross at his throat, silver, blessed, inscribed with prayers in the old language. Only members of the order carry such symbols, and the way he stands, perfectly still, perfectly patient. He has found his prey, and he is deciding how to strike. Elena's hands trembled as she moved away from the window. What do we do? If he knows what you are, if he has been sent to destroy you, he will not attack during the day, not with witnesses about. But once night falls he will come, and when he does I cannot fight him. I am bound by the Count's will never to harm a servant of God. If he stakes me, I will die, truly die. There will be no resurrection, no return. The finality in his voice made Elena's chest tighten with panic. After weeks of working together, of learning his story, of seeing the humanity beneath the curse, the thought of losing him was unbearable. Then we run, she said. We leave the city tonight, before he can attack. He will follow. Hunters of the Order are relentless. Once they have marked their target, they do not stop until it is destroyed or they are dead. There is nowhere I can run that he will not eventually find me. Elena grabbed his arm, surprising both of them with the intensity of her grip. Then we fight, not physically but with words. We convince him that you are different, that you are not the monster he believes you to be. We show him the research. We tell him about the curse. We make him understand that you are trying to break free from the Count's control. Adrian looked down at her hand on his arm, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, but perhaps the ghost of it. Hunters of the Order do not listen to reason, Elena. They see only in absolutes. Undead equals evil. There are no exceptions in their doctrine. Then we make him see exceptions. We make him understand that the world is not as simple as his church has taught him. Before Adrian could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Both of them froze. The knock came again, firm and authoritative, the sound of someone who expected to be answered. Elena looked at Adrian, saw the resignation in his eyes, and made a decision. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her skirt, and walked to the door. Her hand hesitated on the lock for only a moment before she pulled it open. The hunter stood on the threshold, even taller up close, his face weathered and scarred, his eyes the color of winter ice. He removed his hat with one hand, revealing close-cropped grey hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness carved into every line. "Miss Elena Voss?" he said, his voice deep and accented with something Eastern European. "Yes. How may I help you?" "My name is Father Konstantin Volkov. I am here on behalf of the Holy Church, investigating reports of unnatural activity in this region." His eyes moved past her, scanning the interior of the shop, and she knew he was looking for Adrian. "May I come in?" Elena's mind raced. If she refused entry, it would confirm his suspicions. If she allowed him in, he might attack Adrian immediately. She chose the middle path. "I am afraid this is not a good time, Father. I'm in the middle of cataloguing inventory. Perhaps you could return tomorrow?" Konstantin's gaze returned to her, and she saw the intelligence in those cold eyes, the sharp awareness of a man who had hunted monsters for decades and learned to recognize the signs of their presence. "I think we both know that I cannot wait until tomorrow, Miss Voss. I have traveled a very long way to find what hides in this shop. I do not intend to leave without completing my mission." "And what mission is that?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "To destroy the servant of Dracula who has taken refuge here." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration of intent that could not be taken back. Elena felt Adrian's presence behind her, felt the tension radiating from him like heat from a flame. "You are mistaken, Father," she said. "There is no servant of Dracula here, only books and dust and memories." Konstantin's expression did not change, but she saw his hand move slightly toward the inside of his coat, where she was certain he carried weapons blessed for the purpose of killing the undead. "Step aside, Miss Voss. I have no wish to harm you, but I will do what is necessary to complete my task. The creature you harbor is an abomination against God. It does not matter what lies it has told you, what sympathy it has evoked. It is damned, and it must be destroyed." "No," Elena said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "I will not step aside, And if you wish to harm the man in my shop, you will have to go through me first." Constantine's eyes narrowed. "You do not understand what you are protecting. That thing is not a man. It has no soul, no humanity. It is a parasite wearing human skin, and it will eventually betray you in the worst way possible." "You are wrong," Elena said. "He has more humanity than most men I have known, and if you would take a moment to listen instead of condemn, you might understand that the world is more complicated than your doctrine allows." For a long moment, Constantine simply stared at her, and Elena wondered if he would push past her, if violence would begin right here on her doorstep. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand from his coat. "Very well," he said quietly. "I will listen. But know this, Miss Voss, if I am not satisfied with what I hear, if I sense even the slightest deception or threat, I will act, and nothing you say or do will stop me." Elena nodded and stepped back, allowing him entry. Constantine walked into the shop, his boots heavy on the old wooden floor, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. His eyes found Adrian immediately, standing near the back of the shop, perfectly still, perfectly submissive. "Hello, priest," Constantine said, and there was a weight of history in those words. "It has been a long time since the order tracked one of Dracula's servants. Usually you are better at hiding." "I was not hiding, Father Volkov," Adrian replied, his voice calm despite the mortal danger he faced. "I was searching for redemption, for a way to break the curse that binds me to the Count. Miss Voss has been helping me." Constantine's hand moved to the silver cross at his throat, his fingers closing around it. "There is no redemption for the damned. The Church is clear on this matter. Once you have fallen, there is no rising again." "Then the Church is wrong," Elena said, stepping between them, "or at least incomplete in its understanding. Adrian was a priest once, like you. He took vows. He served God. He only fell because he loved, because he tried to save an innocent woman from a monster. Is that truly unforgivable?" Constantine's jaw clenched. "The path to damnation is often paved with good intentions. It does not matter why he fell. What matters is what he has become." "And what if he can be saved?" Elena pressed. "What if there is a ritual, a way to break the Count's hold over him? Would you destroy that possibility simply because your doctrine says it cannot be done?" The hunter was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between Elena and Adrian, weighing and measuring. Finally he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Show me this ritual. Show me your research. If there is even a chance that what you say is true, I will consider it. But if I find deception, if I sense any threat to the living, I will end this now, and God will judge whether I acted rightly." Elena nodded and led him to the back room, where weeks of research lay spread across every surface. Adrian followed at a distance, careful not to make any sudden movements, and as they began to explain their work, to show Constantine the texts and the translations and the desperate hope that had driven them, Elena prayed silently that the hunter's heart was not as hard as his doctrine, and that somewhere beneath the armor of faith there remained a man capable of mercy. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, and in the lengthening shadows, Elena thought she heard laughter, distant and cruel and patient, as only the immortal can be patient. The Count was watching, and he was pleased. Father Constantine Volkov stood in the center of the back room, his trained eyes scanning the chaos of papers and ancient texts that covered every available surface. His weathered hands moved carefully through the documents, touching each one as if it might burn him, reading passages in languages that few living scholars could comprehend. Elena watched him anxiously, trying to read his expression, but the hunter's face remained impassive, carved from stone, and centuries of unwavering conviction. Adrian remained near the doorway, as far from the locked cabinet with its iron cross as the small room would allow. Elena noticed how he kept his hands visible at all times, how he never made any movement that could be construed as threatening. He looked less like a supernatural creature and more like a prisoner awaiting judgment, which she supposed was exactly what he was. After what felt like an eternity, Constantine set down the manuscript he had been examining and turned to face them both. His expression was troubled, the first crack Elena had seen in his stoic demeanor. "This research is extensive," he said quietly. "Your grandfather was a thorough man, Miss Voss, perhaps too thorough. He delved into knowledge that the Church has kept hidden for good reason." "Because the Church fears what it cannot control," Elena replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Because admitting that redemption might be possible for the damned would undermine centuries of absolute doctrine." Constantine's eyes hardened. "You speak carelessly of matters you do not understand. The Church protects humanity from forces that would consume it. Every rule, every prohibition exists because countless lives have been lost learning these lessons." "And yet your rules would have me destroy a man who has harmed no one in 200 years, Elena countered. "A man who has spent centuries in torment, seeking only to be free from a curse he never chose. Where is the mercy in that?" "Mercy?" Constantine's voice rose slightly, the first sign of real emotion breaking through. "You want to speak of mercy? I have seen what Dracula's servants do, Miss Voss. I have walked through villages where every living soul was drained and left as empty husks. I have found children with their throats torn out, left to die slowly while their parents were forced to watch. I have burned entire estates to the ground because the corruption had spread so deep that fire was the only purification. Do not speak to me of mercy when you have never witnessed true evil." Elena flinched at the venom in his words, but she held her ground. "Adrian is not responsible for those atrocities. He told me himself that he has not taken blood in 2 centuries. He cannot feed, he cannot kill. He is a victim of the Count's cruelty, not an agent of it." "Is that what he told you?" Constantine turned his gaze to Adrian, and there was something in his eyes that Elena could not quite identify. Not quite hatred, not quite pity, something in between. "Tell me, creature, have you never carried out your master's commands? Have you never retrieved forbidden knowledge for him? Have you never served as his eyes and ears in the mortal world?" Adrian met the hunter's gaze steadily. "I have done all of those things, Father Volkov. I do not deny it. When the Count calls, I must answer. When he commands, I must obey. That is the nature of the curse. But I have never killed at his bidding. I have never taken a life. The Count knows this limitation and uses me accordingly. I am a scholar, not a weapon. He sends me to gather information, to acquire texts, to observe and report, but I have harmed no one." "Harmed no one directly," Constantine corrected. "But how many deaths have resulted from the knowledge you delivered to your master? How many victims have fallen because you retrieved some cursed tome or revealed some hidden truth? You may not have held the knife, but your hands are far from clean." The words struck Adrian like physical blows. Elena saw him waver, saw the guilt that he had carried for centuries threatening to overwhelm him. She moved to his side without thinking, placing herself between him and the hunter. "Enough," she said firmly. "If we condemn everyone who has unknowingly contributed to evil, then we are all damned. Adrian has told me the truth of his existence. He has hidden nothing from me. And now he is trying to break free from the Count's control. That should count for something. That should earn him at least a chance." Constantine was silent for a long moment, his hand once again moving to the silver cross at his throat. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, but no less intense. "Do you know why I joined the Order of St. Michael, Miss Voss? Do you know what drove me to dedicate my life to hunting creatures like him?" Elena shook her head. "I was 17 years old, a simple farm boy in Romania, when Dracula's servants came to my village. They took my sister. She was 14, innocent, full of life and laughter. They turned her into one of them, and when I found her 3 nights later, she no longer recognized me. She attacked me with inhuman strength, tried to tear out my throat with teeth that had become fangs. I was forced to kill her, my own sister. I held her as she turned to ash in my arms, and her last words were a plea for forgiveness." Elena's anger drained away, replaced by a crushing sympathy. "I am sorry, truly sorry. But that does not mean every servant of the Count deserves the same fate. Adrian is not your sister. He is not a mindless creature driven by hunger." "No," Constantine agreed. "He is something worse. He is aware. He knows what he is and what he serves, and yet he continues to exist, continues to be a tool in the Count's hands. At least my sister did not have to live with the knowledge of what she had become." "Which is exactly why we must try to break his curse," Elena insisted. If there is any chance that the ritual your church has kept hidden might actually work, do we not have an obligation to attempt it? Is that not the Christian thing to do? To offer hope to the hopeless, to extend grace to those who seek redemption? Constantine turned away from them and walked to the locked cabinet, standing before it with his head bowed as if in prayer. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of wind through the old building's cracks and the rapid beating of Elena's heart. When the hunter finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. There is a reason the blood of the innocent is so difficult to obtain, a reason the ritual requires such an impossible component. It is meant to be impossible. The Church designed it that way to ensure that no one would ever actually attempt to redeem one of the damned. Because if redemption were easy, if forgiveness could be granted without cost, then the line between good and evil would blur beyond recognition. The ritual exists not to offer hope, but to prove that there is none. Elena felt her chest tighten with despair. So you are saying it cannot be done? You are saying we have wasted weeks of research chasing an illusion? I'm saying that the Church believes it cannot be done, but I have learned in my years of hunting that the Church does not know everything. There are truths in the darkness that no amount of prayer can illuminate. Constantine turned back to face them, and Elena was shocked to see uncertainty in his eyes. I will give you 1 month. 1 month to find this impossible component, this blood of one who has never lied. If you succeed, I will help you perform the ritual. I will stand as witness and offer whatever protection I can provide. But if you fail, or if at any point I sense that the creature poses a threat to the living, I will fulfill my duty to the Order. I will destroy him, and nothing you say will stop me. Do you understand? Elena nodded, relief and anxiety warring within her. We understand, and thank you, Father Volkov. Thank you for giving us a chance. Do not thank me yet, Constantine said grimly. Finding someone who has never told a lie is not just difficult. It is functionally impossible. Every human being, from the moment they learn language, tells lies. Small ones, large ones, lies of convenience and lies of protection. It is part of the human condition. The only beings who cannot lie are those who cannot speak, and their blood would not satisfy the ritual's requirements. Then we will find a way to interpret the requirement differently, Elena said, though she could hear the desperation in her own voice. There must be something we are missing, some angle we have not considered. Constantine collected his hat from where he had set it on the desk. I will return in 1 week to check on your progress. Until then, I suggest you pray, Miss Voss. Pray that God has more mercy than his church does, because you are going to need divine intervention to accomplish what you have promised. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at Adrian. You should know that I'm not the only hunter who has sensed your presence here. The Order has many eyes, and they are not all as willing to delay judgment as I am. If others come, they will not listen to appeals or reason. They will simply act. You should prepare yourself for that possibility. Adrian inclined his head. I am always prepared for death, Father Volkov. I have been dead for a very long time. What I am not prepared for is hope. That is far more dangerous. Something shifted in Constantine's expression, a flicker of what might have been understanding. Then it was gone, replaced once more by the hard mask of duty. He left without another word, and Elena heard the shop door close behind him, the bell chiming with a sound that seemed far too cheerful for the gravity of what had just transpired. She turned to Adrian and found him staring at the locked cabinet with an expression of profound weariness. We are running out of time, he said quietly. The Count will sense the hunter's presence. He may decide to call me back to his castle, or he may send others to deal with the threat. Either way, our window of opportunity is closing. Then we work faster, Elena said, trying to inject confidence into her voice that she did not entirely feel. We have 1 month. That is enough time to find an answer. Elena. Adrian turned to face her, and she was startled by the intensity in his eyes. You have given me more than I had any right to expect. Your kindness, your belief, your willingness to see me as something other than a monster. If we fail, if the hunter returns and does what he believes he must do, I want you to know that these weeks have been the closest I have come to peace in 2 centuries. That matters. more than you can possibly understand." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. "We are not going to fail. I refuse to accept that. There has to be someone somewhere who fits the ritual's requirements. We just need to find them." They returned to their research with renewed urgency, working through the night and into the following days. Elena barely slept, surviving on strong coffee and stubborn determination. Adrian never left the shop, afraid that Constantine might return early or that other hunters might be watching. They pored over every text, every journal, every scrap of her grandfather's notes, searching for any clue they might have missed. It was on the 5th day, in the early hours before dawn, that Elena found something. She was reading through a collection of her grandfather's personal letters when she came across a passage that made her breath catch. "Adrian," she called, her voice tight with excitement. "Listen to this. It is a letter my grandfather wrote to a colleague dated 3 years before his death. He says, 'I have found a child in the village who may satisfy the ritual's requirements. She is 7 years old, mute from birth, and according to the church records, she has never spoken a single word. If she cannot speak, she cannot lie. I will test her blood tomorrow.'" Adrian moved to her side, reading over her shoulder. Did he test her? Elena flipped through the remaining letters, her hands shaking. There is nothing else, no follow-up, no results. Either he tested her and failed, or something prevented him from completing the test. "Or he succeeded and kept the knowledge hidden," Adrian said slowly. "Your grandfather was paranoid in his final years, convinced that dark forces were watching him. If he found a component as valuable as the blood of the innocent, he may have concealed it to protect it." Elena's mind raced. The locked cabinet. He would have put it in the locked cabinet with the other ritual components. They both turned to look at the iron door with its cross, and Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had never opened that cabinet, had never even tried. Her grandfather's warnings had been too severe, his fear too palpable. But now, with time running out and hope so close she could almost touch it, she knew she had no choice. She retrieved the key from her grandfather's desk, her hands trembling as she fitted it into the lock. The metal was cold against her skin, cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. She turned the key and heard the mechanism click, heavy and final. "Be careful," Adrian warned. "Your grandfather locked this for a reason. There may be protections, wards designed to harm those who open it." Elena nodded and pulled the door open slowly. Inside, the cabinet was surprisingly small, containing only 3 items. A crystal vial of clear liquid that must have been the holy water, a small leather pouch that presumably held the saint's soil, and a glass bottle, sealed with wax, containing a dark red substance that could only be blood. Elena reached in and carefully lifted the bottle, holding it up to the lamplight. The blood inside was still liquid, preserved by whatever alchemical process her grandfather had used. Attached to the bottle with twine was a small piece of paper, and on it, written in her grandfather's shaking hand, was a single word: innocent. Elena's heart hammered in her chest as she turned to Adrian, holding the bottle as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "We have it," she whispered. "We have all 3 components. We can perform the ritual." But Adrian's expression was not one of joy or relief. Instead, he was staring at the bottle with something close to horror. "What is wrong?" Elena asked. "This is what we needed. This is the answer." "Do you know what freely given means, Elena? It means the blood must be donated willingly, with full knowledge of its purpose. A child cannot give such consent. If your grandfather took this blood without explaining what it would be used for, then it does not satisfy the ritual's requirements. The innocence is there, but the freedom of choice is not, and without both, the ritual will fail." Elena's hand tightened on the bottle. No, there has to be a way. We are so close. We cannot give up now." "I am not giving up," Adrian said gently. "But we must face the truth. We need to find the child your grandfather took this blood from. We need to explain the ritual to her and ask if she will consent to its use. Only then will the blood be truly freely given." "She would be 17 years old now," Elena calculated quickly. "If she still lives in Valsburg, we can find her. The church keeps records. We can search." "And if she refuses?" Adrian asked. If she does not want her blood used in a ritual to redeem a vampire, we cannot force her, Elena. That would violate the very principle we are trying to uphold. Elena set the bottle down carefully on the desk and sank into a chair, exhaustion and frustration overwhelming her. They had been so close. The answer had been here all along, locked away in her grandfather's cabinet. But it was still not enough. They needed the girl's consent, and there was no guarantee she would give it. "We will find her," Elena said with more confidence than she felt. "We will explain everything, and we will ask. That is all we can do. Trust that when faced with the truth, people are capable of compassion." Adrian looked at her with an expression that might have been love, if such a thing were possible for the damned. "You have more faith in humanity than anyone I have ever known. I hope you are right." They began their search that very morning, going through church records and questioning villagers who might remember a mute girl from a decade ago. It was slow work, made more difficult by the fact that many people in Valsburg were reluctant to speak with Elena, still suspicious of the strange shop and its even stranger occupant. But slowly, piece by piece, they assembled a picture. The girl's name was Sophia. She had been born mute but otherwise healthy, the daughter of a seamstress who had died when Sophia was 12. She had been raised by various families in the village, passed from household to household, never quite belonging anywhere. And 3 months ago, she had left Valsburg entirely, traveling to the city in search of work. Elena felt her hope crumbling. The city was 2 days' journey away, and they had less than 3 weeks remaining of Constantine's deadline. But she refused to surrender to despair. If Sophia had gone to the city, then they would go to the city. They would find her no matter how long it took. She was preparing for the journey when Father Constantine returned, arriving at the shop with his face grim and his hand on the weapon concealed beneath his coat. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "2 more hunters from the Order arrived in Valsburg this morning. They are not as patient as I am, and they are not interested in delays or explanations. They will come for the creature tonight, and when they do, they will burn this shop to the ground with everything in it. If you have made any progress with the ritual, now is the time to act, because you will not get another chance." Elena looked at Adrian, saw the resignation in his eyes, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Then we perform the ritual tonight," she said, "with the blood we have, and we pray that Sophia, wherever she is, would have consented if we had been able to ask her. It is not perfect, it is not what the ritual demands, but it is all we have, and it will have to be enough." Constantine's eyes narrowed. "That is a dangerous gamble, Miss Voss. If the ritual fails because the consent was not properly obtained, you will have wasted your only chance, and worse, you may draw the Count's attention directly to this place." "The Count's attention is already here," Adrian said quietly. "He has been watching from the beginning. This is what he wants, to see if redemption is possible, or if it is just another lie we tell ourselves to make existence bearable. Either way, the waiting ends tonight." Elena felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a funeral shroud. Everything they had worked for, everything they had hoped for, would be decided in the next few hours. Success meant freedom for Adrian, the breaking of a curse that had lasted for centuries. Failure meant his destruction, and possibly hers as well. But there was no more time for doubt, no more time for careful research and measured decisions. The hunters were coming, and they would not stop until Adrian was ash and memory. So Elena gathered the 3 components from the locked cabinet, and Adrian retrieved the Codex Sanguinis with its blood-stained pages and ancient instructions, and Father Constantine Volkov, hunter of monsters and servant of a merciless god, bowed his head and began to pray. Outside, the sun sank toward the horizon, and the shadows grew long and hungry. And in a castle far away, in a throne room carved from darkness and despair, Count Dracula opened his ancient eyes and smiled. Night fell over Valsburg like a judgment, swift and absolute. Elena drew the heavy curtains across the shop windows and bolted the door, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Father Constantine moved through the space with practiced efficiency, marking protection symbols on the walls with blessed chalk, muttering prayers in Latin that seemed to make the air itself grow heavier. Adrian stood in the center of the back room, perfectly still, his eyes closed, preparing himself for whatever was to come. They had perhaps 2 hours before the other hunters arrived, perhaps less. Constantine had been clear about their methods. They would not negotiate. They would not wait for explanations. They would simply break down the door and do what they believed God had commanded them to do. Burn the vampire, purify the corruption, leave nothing but ash and sanctified ground. Elena spread the pages of the Codex Sanguinis across the desk, her grandfather's notes laid out beside them for reference. The ritual was complex, requiring precise timing and exact words spoken in a language that predated Latin, a tongue that scholars called the first speech, the language humans had used when the world was young, and magic was not yet separated from reality. "Are you certain you can read this?" Constantine asked, looking over her shoulder at the strange symbols that covered the ancient pages. "My grandfather left phonetic guides," Elena replied, her voice more confident than she felt. "I have been practicing the pronunciation for weeks. It will not be perfect, but it should be close enough." "Should be is not the same as will be," the hunter said grimly. "If you make a mistake, if you mispronounce even a single word, the consequences could be catastrophic. The ritual might fail entirely, or worse, it might succeed in some twisted form, binding the creature to you instead of freeing him from the Count." Elena's hands paused over the pages. "What do you mean, binding him to me?" Constantine's expression was grave. "Curses are forms of connection, Miss Voss. Bonds between master and servant, between victim and tormentor. When you break one bond, the energy must go somewhere. If the ritual is not performed correctly, that connection could transfer to whoever is conducting it. You could become his new master, or he could become bound to your life force, unable to exist without you, draining you slowly until you are nothing but a husk." Adrian's eyes opened, and Elena saw fear there for the first time since she had known him. Not fear for himself, but fear for her. "We should not do this," he said quietly. "The risk is too great. I have existed in this state for 2 centuries. I can continue to exist. But if something happens to you because of me, if you suffer because you tried to help me, I will never forgive myself." Elena turned to face him, and in that moment she understood with perfect clarity what she needed to do. She had spent weeks researching, planning, hoping for a solution that would save Adrian without cost. But there was always a cost. Her grandfather had learned that lesson too late, driven mad by knowledge that no mortal mind should hold. Constantine had learned it when he killed his own sister. And now it was Elena's turn to understand that salvation never came without sacrifice. "I know the risks," she said firmly, "and I accept them. We are doing this, Adrian, tonight, no matter what happens." She picked up the first component, the crystal vial of holy water blessed by a pope whose name had been lost to history. The liquid inside caught the lamplight and seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. According to the ritual, this represented purification, the washing away of sin and corruption. The second component was the leather pouch containing soil from the grave of St. Catherine of Siena, a mystic who had spoken with God and seen visions of heaven and hell. The soil represented mortality, the earth to which all living things must return, the reminder that even the undead were once human and born of dust. And the third component, the one that made Elena's hands tremble as she lifted it, was the glass bottle containing Sophia's blood. Blood taken without full consent, blood that might not satisfy the ritual's requirements, blood that represented innocence and free will and the possibility of redemption through grace. "We begin," Elena said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Constantine took up a position near the door, his hand on the silver cross at his throat, his eyes watchful. Adrian knelt in the center of the room, his head bowed, his hands clasped before him as if in prayer. Elena opened the Codex Sanguinis to the page her grandfather had marked and began to read. The words felt strange in her mouth, syllables that human tongues were not meant to shape, consonants that seemed to catch in her throat like thorns. But she pushed through, speaking each phrase carefully, feeling the air in the room begin to change, to thicken, as if reality itself were listening. She unsealed the vial of holy water and poured it in a circle around Adrian, watching as the blessed liquid hissed when it touched the floor, sending up thin wisps of steam that smelled of incense and old prayers. Adrian flinched as drops splashed onto his skin, and Elena saw small burns appear where the water made contact, but he did not cry out. He remained perfectly still, accepting the pain as part of his penance. Elena continued reading, her voice growing stronger as she found the rhythm of the ancient language. She opened the leather pouch and scattered the saint's soil over Adrian's head and shoulders, watching as it clung to him like ash, marking him as one who had been dead but might yet live again. The final component was the blood. Elena's hands shook as she broke the wax seal and removed the stopper from the bottle. The blood inside was still liquid, still vital, preserved by her grandfather's alchemical skill. She raised the bottle above Adrian's bowed head and prepared to pour, but before she could complete the action, the shop door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. 2 men stood in the entrance, both dressed in the black coats and wide-brimmed hats of the Order of St. Michael. They were younger than Constantine, harder, their faces carved from zealotry and absolute conviction. One carried a crossbow loaded with a bolt made of blessed wood. The other held a sword that gleamed with silver inlay, religious symbols etched along the blade. "Step away from the creature," the one with the crossbow commanded, his voice thick with an accent Elena could not place. "Step away now, or we will consider you complicit in its sins." Constantine moved to block their path, his own hand now holding a weapon Elena had not seen him draw, a short blade that looked ancient and deadly. "Stop, brothers. You do not understand what is happening here. We are attempting to break the creature's bond to Dracula. We are trying to free him from the Count's control." The hunter with the sword laughed, a sound without humor. "Free him? There is only one freedom for the damned, Constantine. You know this. You have taken that oath just as we have. Why do you hesitate now?" "Because I have seen the research," Constantine replied, not backing down. "Because I have read the texts. Because I believe there may be more to God's mercy than our doctrine allows." "Then you are a heretic as well as a coward," the hunter with the crossbow spat. He raised his weapon, aiming not at Adrian, but at Elena. "Last chance, woman. Step away, or die with the monster." Elena did not move. Instead, she looked down at Adrian, saw the resignation in his eyes, saw him preparing to accept his destruction. And in that moment, she understood what the ritual truly required. Not just blood freely given, but sacrifice freely chosen, a life offered willingly for the salvation of another. Her grandfather had been close to this realization, she knew that now, but he had not been able to take the final step, had not been willing to pay the ultimate price. That was why his research had remained incomplete, why the ritual had never been performed. Because redemption required more than ancient words and blessed components. It required someone brave enough or foolish enough to offer their own life in exchange for a damned soul's freedom. "I am sorry, Adrian," Elena whispered. Then, before anyone could stop her, before her own fear could paralyze her, she lifted the bottle of blood and poured it not over Adrian's head, but over her own hands, letting it flow between her fingers as she placed both palms against his face. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Light exploded from the point of contact, pure white radiance that filled the room and drove back the shadows. Elena felt power surge through her body, ancient and terrible and holy, burning through her veins like liquid fire. She screamed, unable to help herself, as the ritual seized hold of her life force and began to channel it through Adrian, using her as a conduit to break the bonds that had held him for 2 centuries. She heard shouting, heard Constantine's voice raised in alarm, heard the hunters from the Order demanding answers. But it was all distant now, fading, as if she were sinking beneath deep water. The ritual consumed her, pulling at her essence, unraveling the threads that bound her soul to her body. In her dimming vision, she saw Adrian's face transform. The pallor of death receded, replaced by warmth and color. His eyes, which had been the flat iron gray of the undead, suddenly blazed with life and emotion. His chest, which had not moved with breath for centuries, suddenly heaved as air-filled lungs that had forgotten how to function. He was becoming human again, restored by the sacrifice she was making, redeemed by her willingness to trade her life for his. But the cost was too high. Elena felt herself slipping away. felt the darkness closing in. She had expected this, had known that the ritual would demand everything, but she had not anticipated how much it would hurt, how every cell in her body would scream in protest as life was ripped away from her. She was dying, and she was not ready. Adrian's hands came up to grip her wrists, and his touch was warm now, fully human. She saw tears streaming down his face, saw horror and gratitude and devastating sorrow warring in his expression. "No," he gasped, his voice raw and broken. "No, Elena, what have you done? This is not what I wanted. This is not redemption. This is damnation of another kind." Elena tried to speak, tried to tell him that it was all right, that she had made her choice freely, that at least one of them would survive this night. But her voice would not come. The darkness was too close now, pulling at her, demanding its due. Then she felt something else, a presence in the room, vast and cold and ancient beyond measure. The temperature dropped so suddenly that frost formed on the windows. The hunters from the Order stumbled backward, their weapons forgotten, their faces pale with instinctive terror. Even Constantine, who had hunted monsters for decades, looked shaken. Count Dracula had arrived. He did not enter through the door. He simply appeared, materializing from shadow and nightmare, as if he had always been there, and they were only now able to perceive him. He was impossibly tall, gaunt in a way that suggested not weakness, but the distillation of power to its purest form. His face was ageless and terrible, beautiful in the way that a statue carved from ice is beautiful, perfect and utterly lifeless. His eyes were the color of old blood, and when they fixed on Elena, she felt as though she were being dissected, examined, weighed, and found both fascinating and insignificant. "How touching," the Count said, his voice like velvet wrapped around broken glass. "A mortal girl offering her life for my servant's freedom. I confess, I did not expect such devotion. Humans are usually so much more selfish in their compassion." Adrian's grip on Elena's wrists tightened. She could feel his newly beating heart, could sense his terror, not for himself, but for her. "Master," he gasped, the word torn from him by centuries of conditioning. "Please, she is innocent. She does not deserve this. Take me instead. Take me back. Undo what has been done." Dracula moved closer, gliding rather than walking, and Elena saw that he cast no shadow despite the lamplight. He reached out one pale hand and touched Adrian's face, almost tenderly, like a father examining a wayward child. "You are restored," the Count observed with what might have been satisfaction. "The curse is broken. You are human again, mortal and fragile and temporary. After 200 years of service, you are finally free of me.